Good afternoon. Thank you all so much for joining us for this really incredible conversation with a panel of courageous and amazing people who have experienced some of the worst human rights abuses in the criminal justice system. And today's conversation is really going to be focused on how these human rights abuses happen and what we can do going forward to make sure that no child has to experience what our panelists have experienced in the criminal justice system. My name is James Dold. I'm the CEO and founder of Human Rights4Kids. Before we get started, I just wanted to lay out a couple of quick logistics for members of the media and congressional staffers who may be on today's call. We're going to go through our entire program, starting with a presentation by Yasmin from Rights4Girls, and then we'll roll right into our panel discussion. At the end of that, we'll open it up for questions around 1:45 or 1:50 or so. In order to ask a question, you can either put it in the chat box or you can raise your hand and I will unmute your line. And when that happens, please be sure to identify yourself, either the office that you're representing or the media outlet that you're with before you ask your question. And that's, and we'll keep the questions sort of rolling in until our 1 p.m. hour. Again, thank you all so much for taking this time to join us. I want to just thank our partners, Rights4Girls, the Campaign for the Fair Sentencing of Youth, the Anti-Recidivism Coalition, First Focus Campaign for Children, the National Juvenile Justice Network, Coalition for Juvenile Justice, NJJDPC Coalition, and Human Rights Watch, along with many, many other partners that are too numerous to name. We're incredibly thankful and grateful for your partnership and for co-hosting this event today. And without further ado, it is my distinct pleasure to introduce Yasmin Vafa of Rights4Girls, who will be talking about and really providing context for the panel discussion that we will be having. Yasmin, welcome and thank you again for joining us.
Thank you so much, James, and thank you for the opportunity to be here today with all of you and to be able to talk about such a critical issue. So I just want to start with this presentation and just to really talk about the importance of our nation's failure to protect child sex crime victims and victims of sexual exploitation in our legal system. I think it's really important that we understand that this conversation is happening against the backdrop of a cultural understanding about the harms of systemic racism, about a shared desire to end harmful practices like mass incarceration and predatory policing. But it's also happening against the backdrop of a global reckoning around the pervasiveness and harms of patriarchal and gendered violence, where globally we are witnessing brave survivors speak out to demand dignity and safety and a movement towards accountability. What we haven't really seen is an appreciation or understanding about the ways in which these two movements overlap and intersect in the daily lives of children of color, and particularly girls of color. And so I'm very grateful to have the space to be able to kind of talk about the complexity of these issues and the context of our criminal legal system's failure to protect child sex crime victims. And so first and foremost, I think it's absolutely critical that we understand the fact that sexism, misogyny, misogynoir are so deeply entrenched in our culture, and in doing so really fuel a culture of gendered violence. And so we know that we are experiencing sexism at home, in our communities, at schools. We know that child sexual abuse is incredibly rampant and is on the rise due to the pandemic. We know that children are experiencing violence and harassment in their schools and are increasingly being subject to sexual exploitation and sex trafficking, including familial trafficking, which is also on the rise in light of the pandemic. But we also have to talk about the fact that gender-based violence disproportionately impacts communities of color, and particularly women and girls of color. And so here are just some of the very stark statistics with respect to its impact on Native and Black women and girls. And so we can see here just how utterly pervasive and devastating gender-based violence, and particularly sexual violence, are on specific populations. And so in our work at Rights4Girls, we became painfully aware of the fact that although child sexual abuse and violence are incredibly common in communities all across the country, that when children who witnessed or experienced violence came from economic or family stability, they were often more readily able to access the services and supports needed to get them on a path to healing. But unfortunately for children at the margins, those who were system involved, those who were experiencing poverty, those who experienced other challenges, disabilities, and other adversities, they were often left to fend for themselves. And so our society too often would pathologize, punish, and criminalize their responses to trauma. And so we came up with this term, the abuse to prison pipeline, as a way to really describe the pathways of gendered violence that fuel the criminalization of youth of color, and particularly girls of color, as a direct result of their victimization. And so again, our advocacy and scholarship is really focused on girls, but I think many of these themes impact other vulnerable children. One topic that consistently came up in our research was that sexual abuse was a key driver of justice involvement in girls. And so it really begs the question of why that is. You know, why is it that we have these children who are suffering egregious harm and who are not met with services, support, and protection? Well, I think that many of us are familiar with the concepts of racial and implicit biases, but in the last few years, there's been a lot of great scholarship that's really drilled down on these points. And so one report in particular, Girlhood Interrupted, out of the Georgetown Law Center on Poverty and Inequality, talks about this concept of adultification. And really what this report did was look at this concept with respect to Black girls in particular, and how adults perceive Black girls in relation to white girls of the same age. And essentially what they found was that adults perceive Black girls as less innocent, as more knowledgeable about sex, as less needing protection or comfort. And really what this is essentially a denial of childhood, a denial of childlike innocence. And so even though this report really specifically looked at Black girls, I think many of these subjects around the denial of childhood, about who our society decides gets to be treated and seen as a child, and who gets to be seen and treated as a crime victim, can apply to all vulnerable children. And so it's no surprise that the abuse to prison pipeline disproportionately impacts girls of color. In our report, we looked specifically at Native American, Black, and Latina girls, but there is a dearth of data with respect to other vulnerable populations. So LGBTQ, gender expansive young people, and youth of color, we know are impacted as well, but there is just limited data. And so we really wanted to know, was this a one-off, right? Was this a couple of bad jurisdictions, or was this a pattern? And so what we found in looking at the available national data as well as the jurisdiction or state-specific data was that unfortunately it was a pattern. So when we're looking nationally, we see that over 70% and close to 73% of girls behind bars report past histories of sexual and physical abuse. But those numbers were even higher in some jurisdictions, in places like South Carolina, where it was upwards of 80%. California, Oregon found similar percentages. And when we took those high rates of trauma together with the most common offenses for youth, it became very clear that girls were being arrested because of the violence that they experienced. And so again, the most common offenses for girls in the juvenile legal system were things like running away from home, domestic and family violence. So, fight with mom, fight with grandma. And because of these long-standing mandatory DV arrest laws, we were seeing that law enforcement would respond and criminalize the young girl. Another area that is really just neglected and due to misidentification and misinformation is domestic child sex trafficking, which is particularly important. And we'll hear more about this in today's panel. But it's really critical that we understand that the vast majority of sex trafficking cases in the United States involve American-born youth. We are talking about vulnerable children, again, system involved, runaway and homeless youth, disproportionately girls and gender expansive youth of color. And so it's important that we, don't buy into these media tropes and cultural justifications that really sanitize and mask the violence and harm these young people experience in the sex trade. We hear them cast aside as underage prostitutes or workers. And it's really important that we understand under federal law, any child under the age of 18 engaged in the commercial sex trade is by definition a victim of trafficking. But despite this reality, and despite the fact that many of these kids are too young to even consent to sex, they are routinely criminalized for prostitution and related offenses. And so our failure to really respond to these issues means that these kids are then sent into the justice system. We're not responding fuels a cycle of future incarceration. And of course, we have to look at these harmful and degrading conditions of confinement that are routine across the board in juvenile detention systems and other systems. And obviously, these would be injurious to any child. But think about the impact of restraints, isolation, strip searches on survivors of sexual abuse. And so again, our collective failure to respond, to address and heal the underlying trauma means that these child survivors then engage in other harmful behaviors. So we see things like self-harm, self-medication, and in situations where the abuse is ongoing and the violence doesn't stop, we see the fact that these children then perpetrate harm in order to act as a form of self-preservation and self-protection. And so this has really led to the rise of what is being dubbed in the anti-trafficking space as these victim offender cases. And so due to this growing awareness and due to the attention that some of these cases got, and I think Cyntoia Brown's case is probably one of the more well-known ones because of all the celebrities that basically came together to help promote her release. But I can tell you in our work, there are hundreds, if not thousands, of Cyntoia Browns, many of whom are still languishing behind bars. I can tell you there's a number of children right now facing very serious criminal penalties. These last two cases here are two teenagers who are facing very serious charges, one facing capital murder charges in Texas for her perceived role in the death of her trafficker. And so the promising news is that this growing awareness has led to a number of bipartisan legislative proposals. And so today we're here to promote this bipartisan legislative package. Included in that package is Sara's Law, which is sponsored by Congressman Westerman. HR 2858 would at long last allow for this understanding of the developmental differences between children and adults, would allow judges to consider a child's history and trauma history in making sentencing decisions. And so judges would be able to deviate from mandatory minimum sentences, would be able to suspend part or all of a sentence for children accused of harming their abusers. There's a number of state-based initiatives that have similar elements of this law. I would encourage you to look and see if your state has something similar on the books, and if not, to really advocate for that, as well as these other federal laws that are also seeking to take a more age-appropriate response to children. And so I think with that, I will turn it over to James to get our panel started. But again, I just want to thank you for the opportunity to be able to share about some of these complexities today.
Thank you so much, Yasmin. That was an incredibly powerful presentation. I think I speak for everyone who's participating today that it was incredible to just hear the data that you all have collected and the incredible work that Rights4Girls has done to really paint this portrait of what's happening to girls of color in our justice system nationally. And, you know, one of the things I routinely say to people is that if you care about child sex abuse victims, if you care about child victims of physical abuse, if you care about children who are trafficking victims or victims of neglect, you have to care about these kids in the criminal justice system, because when all of our systems fail them, this is where they end up. And oftentimes we end up throwing them away into a system and giving them these harsh penalties where we don't take into account their age or their trauma background. And, you know, I think nowhere is that more tragic than in the stories that we're about to hear. And so it's really important that folks understand that we have a criminal justice and criminal legal system that really has run amok and has completely jettisoned the human rights of kids in our justice system. So Yasmin, thank you so much. And now it's my distinct pleasure to introduce our panel, or rather have our panel introduce themselves to you all. And I'm gonna call on folks one by one, and everyone will go through and give a brief opening statement. And if you can, in your response and in your opening statement, you know, just tell us a little bit about yourself, your case, how you became system involved, and how you're doing today, where you're at today. And so first, I'm going to start with a good friend of mine, who we've known each other for quite a while and been working together for many years on Sara's Law and trying to create national awareness about this epidemic of violating the human rights of our children. It's my honor to introduce the one and only Ms. Sara Kruzan. Sara?
Let me unmute. So thank you all. Thank you, Yasmin, for clarifying that information. I'm so grateful to stand here along everyone. I chose to stand today. I chose intentionally to put the grave wall because I wanted people to really understand what it's like to be a child and to have to be exposed, right? You go into the system and to be stripped from the inside out. So this is intentional. And I'm also not going to filter any trauma that's going to show up because that's something that I think we're here to have the conversation so we can fully understand what is occurring with our children and the impact of how it ties in with ACEs. I'm going to read my opening remarks. So my name is Sara Kruzan. I have more time as a human being in my experience as W59700, which was issued to me once I became an adult in the correctional facility in the state of California. For the majority of my life, I was identified as that number while haunted by horrendous and embarrassing and unspeakable situations I was subjected to by adults and the community members in my life. I think that one act of violence upon a child is equivalent to 1,000 plus acts upon a child, especially when it's imposed by an adult. So as we move forward, let us not lose sight of that. I ask you, please. To this day, I'm in therapy, attempting. Sometimes it's pathetic. Sometimes it's resistant. Sometimes I am strong, but I'm attempting to make sense of why we are here still in this space. Being an invisible voice of many, as an unidentified victim of child sex trafficking for many years, I find that Sara's Law would allow judges the awareness, the compassion, and the discretion to make decisions based on trauma-informed best practices to enhance the overall wellness of our children who come in contact with our justice system. For me, my experience, my justice system was also my trafficker, my exploiter. I was in elementary school and 11 years old when I was in my life was abruptly interrupted by the man who he robbed me of my childhood. Coming from a home and community where drugs and abuse were the norm, I was an easy target, as all of us, for a man with sinister intentions for his unidentified trauma. A man who himself was coming from a place of pain and hurt. From age 13 to age 16, I was a sex trafficking victim who endured horrific abuse, rape, and torture at the hands of my trafficker and other adult males that also included professionals that were to serve and protect us in the community. At 16, through an act of violence, I shot and killed him. Despite being a victim of child sex trafficking and exploitation, sexual abuse, verbal abuse, racial abuse, being marginalized, violence, and rape committed by the man I had killed, I was tried as an adult, where none of the abuses and the complex traumas I experienced throughout my childhood were admitted into evidence. I was the lower caste, I was a low brow, I was a commodity. I did not matter. I had no victims advocate. I had no therapeutic modalities. Dealing with trauma-informed care offered to me. As a rape victim, I was my own witness. After 2.5 days of trial, I was also ordered to pay $10,000 of restitution to the victim services, which I did. And while incarcerated at CDCR, I worked diligently to the point to where my knuckles would bleed to pay off my restitution. I learned very quickly to wrap my knuckles with duct tape so that I can show up the next day and meet my quota. Because if I didn't meet my quota, I'd be written a 128, and my 128 would lead to a 115 or a dismissal from my job. But I made sure those US Star Fields and those California Bears were submitted to the right institution. The prosecution, the judge, and the media depicted me as a sophisticated monster, the worst of the worst, and sentenced me as much. And in a sense, yes, I did have those qualities because I reflected exactly what was given to me by the adults in my life. The justice system sentenced me to life without the possibility of parole, plus 4 years for killing the man who victimized me for nearly a third of my young life. Years later, thanks to the tireless work of my legal team, Human Rights Watch, and the community advocates, my sentence was commuted and reduced by former California Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger. On October 31st, I was paroled after serving 19 years and 7 months. What happened to me was not justice. What's happening to all of us is injustice. None of us should have been sent to prison in the first place. A far too common response, especially for girls of color in our country, for actions taken against their rapists and traffickers. And I'm gonna own all of my nationality. I am a multiracial, beautiful, ethnic, complex human being that represents all nationalities, because I needed to do my DNA and fully understand. I needed to be clear of where I was able to stand in this life moving forward as far as race was concerned. When I was silenced, I felt invisible. I felt my voice and life experiences had no value, that I as a person had no value. I was labeled a child prostitute. The word prostitute itself to this very day still triggers me. It releases something in my whole endocrine system. Nelson Mandela once said, there is no keener revelation of a society's soul than the way in which we treat its children. What does it say about our soul then if we allow our children who have been trafficked, abused, and raped, silenced, to be sentenced to decades in prison for having committed crimes against their abusers? The bipartisan reform effort by Congress members Karen Bass, Tony Cardenas, and Bruce Westerman will help ensure that we treat all children like children in the justice system, and that we prioritize helping children heal from the trauma that led them into the justice system to begin with. I'm particularly excited about Sara's law and Congressman Westerman's bill, which would give judges greater flexibility in cases like ours to deviate from mandatory minimum sentences and suspend many sentences so as not to keep children victims in cages and in silence. Children like us deserve to be protected by the system. Let's not allow the justice system to take anything else away from child trafficking and sexually abused victims. We have been forced to give away too much already, and Congress has an opportunity to be mindful, to be present, to merge, to listen. Our uncomfortable and vulnerable sharing, it's not something that you sideswipe and move forward. We're here today because we believe that our stories and our experiences are gonna kind of have some kind of positive impact, that you'll listen to us and realize that you can't keep doing this to children and you have the authority to change it. So with love and compassion and understanding and forgiveness, with restorative justice and transformative justice best practices, we're asking you to please hear us out, hold our hands, wipe away our tears, and really say, we're not gonna do this anymore. And as a mom of a 6-year-old, if I can break the chains in this space of trauma, then I'm asking you to do it as well. So thank you.
It's very powerful, Sarah. Very well said. Thank you so much for sharing. Patrice, I'm going to go ahead and go to you next.
Hi, guys. My name is Patrice Smith. I sit before you as a survivor. I met my abuser at the age of 15. Overwhelmed with the plight of poverty, violence, and a broken home, I was groomed with gifts, money, and attention. Sexual words became advances, which resulted in my being consistently sexually abused by him. I felt ashamed, scared, confused, and unworthy. At the age of 16, I was incarcerated for my role in his death. I had internalized the shame of his abuse so deeply, I was unable to testify in court while my father was present. My abuser was also a pastor, which led to the deterioration of what little spirituality I had at that time. While trying to navigate these traumatic events, the media vilified me. I woke up every day to my name, picture, and life in the news, in the newspaper, being torn apart, exposed for public opinion, and no compassion or mercy was found. At 17 years old, I was given 25 to life, more time than I had been alive. On September 17th, 2020, after having served 21 years and 9 months, I was resentenced to time served. This was due to a new law in the New York State called the Domestic Violence Survivors Justice Act. This law acknowledges and validates that acts committed as a result of trauma should be handled in a more restorative manner and less punitively. Sarah's law expounds on this same principle. Children are the most vulnerable people in society. Their life is directly influenced by the adults they encounter and the environment in which they live. Studies have reported that at 16 years of age, a child's brain is not even fully developed, which led to the landmark cases of Miller versus Alabama, Graham versus Florida, and Roper versus Simmons. And yet children are still being tried as adults. There is still misconception that somehow the loss of innocence in childhood is still the fault of the child. I do not sit here as an exception to the rule, but the rule itself. Children, especially Black children, represent over 52% of youth prosecuted in the adult criminal court. This happens even though it's proven that children age out of criminal activities. Prison is not corrective action, but a cruel way to silence our youth and their experiences with poverty, violence, and trauma. Legislation like Sarah's law is more than needed, it's required. No child, before they even have a chance to live, should be made to feel as if their life doesn't have value. Thank you. I'm done.
Thank you, Patrice. Thank you. And then David, I'm going to go ahead and go to you next.
How y'all doing? My name is David Garlock. And I wanted to share a poem real quickly before I go into my story. A moment was all that it took, and my life was forever changed. I walked down those steps thinking we were playing hide and go seek. I was the first one to go hide. I found a closet and went in, hoping that I found a good spot. Time went by. I felt good about my place, and then I was found. Nothing was said or done about my capture, just darkness and silence. That is when the abuse began, hands on me in ways it shouldn't be. I was in a state of shock and confusion. I could not move or say a word. Why was this happening? What was going on? I couldn't comprehend anything. When it all ended, I was told to go upstairs. I walked up each step and was in a stupor. Why did this happen? He pulled me to the side and told me that I would die if I ever told anyone. Fear and confusion now filled my mind. How could I ever be the same? I went down those steps in an 11-year-old and came up as a broken person who now had to become everything for everyone. So at 11 years old, the sexual abuse began with me. And before then, my brother was abused by this same individual. And he was this person that had gotten out of prison and moved to Washington. And he began to groom my brother to get contact with me. And so for 8 years, this abuse went on. And as it got longer, it became more physical. You know, this gentleman had tried to kill my brother and me numerous times. At the point where we took his life, he would come to the restaurant that my brother and I worked at and just stood outside and watched what we were doing. If we flirted with a waitress or one of the customers we were waiting on, we got the crap beat out of us when we got home. And so this was a constant thing. And he had also started molesting a 14-year-old boy at the same time. And just everything that had happened, we knew that we had to make a decision, you know, and it was an irrational decision, but we took his life. I was 19, my brother was 22. And 4 months later, we were arrested and we had buried the body, and so for a 4-month period of time, we dealt with the fact that we had taken somebody's life. And just to get through that, it was all about drugs and alcohol. It was a way that I coped with the thought process that I had taken somebody's life. And when we were arrested, it was in Alabama. We thought we were going to get the death penalty or life without parole, but we were just sentenced or just charged with murder, and that carries 10 years to 99 to life. So we did feel like that was taken off where we weren't going to end up dying. But we had court-appointed lawyers that didn't want to do anything for us. We didn't have family members to fight for us and to help us out. And so these court-appointed lawyers didn't want to do anything for us. There were many things that we had to put in for. Like in Alabama, there's a youthful offender status where if you commit a crime under 21, you can petition this, and the most time you could receive is 3 years. So I kept on my court-appointed lawyer to put me in for this. He finally did. I went before the judge, and my lawyer made the petition, and the judge denied it. And he laughed and he said, rehabilitation is a 70-year-old joke. And right then I knew that we were in trouble. And finally, our court-appointed lawyers got a plea deal. The only plea deal they came to us with was 25 years. So I served 13 and a half years and was released in 2013. I've been out of prison over 8 years, been able to graduate college, got married. My wife and I, we just had a child 7 months ago, and he is what a second chance looks like. And I am like Sarah, it's about breaking that trauma, breaking that cycle, and giving him a life that I never had. At 11 years old, my childhood was taken from me. And it's right then where I learned how to act, because all I did as a child, I wore different masks. When I was around family members, I wore one mask. When I was at church, I wore another mask. When I was on the football field, I wore another mask, because how would it be if I told these men that are my friends what was happening to me? Would they believe me? Would they think I was less than? Would they think I was weak? Because as a male being abused, it has differences than a woman or a young lady being abused, because a lot of it has to do with your masculinity and feeling less than and weak, and these laws, are very important, because there's so many people in prison today. In South Carolina, there's a person named Michael Cope who's been in prison for 28 years, committed an offense like me. Terrence Williams here in Pennsylvania has the same type of case. We have to pass these laws to help these men and these women receive sentences that are fair and just, because as Yasmin was talking about, abuse to prison pipeline, I also talk about it as a trauma to prison pipeline, because all of us have experienced so many of these adverse childhood experiences, and we shouldn't be judged because we were escaping a situation. We should be judged on what was taken from us too, not just what we did. Thank you.
David, thank you so much for sharing, and also congratulations on the birth of your son. All right, next I'm gonna go to Miss Alexis Martin.
Good morning or good afternoon. Like David, I want to start off with a poem and then do my introduction. My name is Alexis Martin, and my poem is called Child. The air was settled in complete stillness. All sound vanished out. Tears flowed on cheeks. Doors opened out of nowhere. Blue and white uniforms appeared with guns drawn. Then, like a rubber band snapping back, sound emerges. Get on the ground. Get on the fucking ground. Alexis, what happened? What did you do? Call my lawyer, Josh. Words that had every important meaning possible was said in the 3 minutes. This shuffled her out of the detention home that once was her safety net. But in that moment, never was the words "I love you" spoken. There in the midst of officers was a mother, a grandmother, a friend, and a child. Never once did it cross their minds to say "I love you." Never once did the mother reach for her child, yet in that moment, the child reached for her mother mentally one last time. The last time she'll ever dream of her mother to protect her. Seconds later, she'll no longer ever have a chance to be a child. Moments to come, childhood would just be a distant thought. something only one dreams of. This child now has to accept adulthood forever, accepting the fact that her parents will never protect and comfort her, accepting that she is alone, accepting that she is not a child, to acknowledge the death of her dreams and her current future. Child, choices hidden in life's depths. My name is Alexis Martin, and I am a survivor of human trafficking. My trafficking began when I was 14 years old by one of my friend's fathers. At 15 years old, what makes my case different from a lot of other people's, but similar in so many different ways, is I was not the trigger man of my case. At 15 years old, I was told I no longer could go to school, and my abuse got very courageous and out of control. My abuser, he literally was taking the last pieces of my soul. And I left. I came up with a plan to leave, and that plan involved a robbery that took his life. There was evidence across the board that I did not have my hand on any weapon that night. And at 15 years old, I turned myself in the next day. I had an AWOL for being a runaway because I ran away. I was on probation. I had a domestic violence with my sister. And I turned myself in for a probation violation because I turned myself in a week before that to try to get away from my trafficker, and was released. I was released the week before this death, even after the judges asked me, my probation officer asked me. It looked like I was in prostitution in front of somebody my trafficker sent with me to portray as my god sister. I told them no. They released me and told me to come back that Thursday. Wednesday night, Thursday morning, my trafficker died. I never got to come back for my outstanding AWOL. I came back, and in the middle of the detention center, I was arrested for murder, the murder of my trafficker. For 2.5 years, I fought to be heard. I didn't know what human trafficking was. So I didn't even understand that I was wholly a victim. So in those 2.5 years, I'm fighting for my freedom. I also was learning that I was a victim, that this man never possibly loved me, even though I loved and hated him in the same breath, that I was nothing but a pawn to him. I continue to learn these things and continue to fight for my freedom. At 17, I was sentenced 21 to life. I was 17 years old. I stood in the courtroom, and people that I've known for my whole life, my biological sister, I had to say goodbye to. And some people did not care. They seen me as a monster. They seen me as a murderer. They seen me as a criminal. For the next 7.5 years of my life, I served as Alexis Martin, inmate 91885 of Marysville and Dayton Correctional Institute. In those 7.5 years, I fought for others. I had other girls that reached out to me that felt like I was their strength. So somewhere in there, I found the strength to be that for others. And I fight to this day. On April 20th, 2020, I was released. Governor DeWine released me from prison. And I will never be so much grateful. It took years for somebody to hear, but even now I'm still not free. I just had to explain to my 7-year-old niece why I couldn't go swimming with her and why I have this box on my ankle. In moments like that, it's important why we need to educate the world. We need to educate the lawmakers and how it affects us as kids, how it affects us as victims, because even them they're still limited to the amount of freedom they can grant you. You know, DeWine gave a great blessing to my family, but I'm still living in trauma every day, where I have to apply for job applications and explain to them that I have an ankle monitor on. Where I have to explain to my younger siblings and cousins why I can't go swimming, and I've been home for almost 2 years, and I still have an ankle monitor on. So even presently in this day, I am still fighting the bondage that happened with my trafficker. But it also, if it doesn't happen to me, then I wouldn't know to fight for somebody else. So I'm still fighting to this day. I'm going to continue to fight. I find great passion in fighting because for so many years I was silenced. For so many years I didn't have a breath. For so many years I didn't understand what it was to fight. I've been fighting since I was 3 years old. My molestation started when I was 3. And it just continued to trade mental prisons for mental prisons and bondage to another bondage. And today, I feel like no matter what bondage somebody gives me, you can't bind my mind, you can't bind my words, and I'm going to use them. So I hope that I am heard, that other survivors today is heard, and that little by little, one by one, we make a difference. Because we have voices today, so I hope you hear us roar. And with that, I'm going to end.
Incredibly powerful, Alexis. Thank you, and welcome home. And I'm sorry to everyone for the experiences that you went through. You never should have been sent to prison in the first place, any one of you. So now our last panelist to introduce herself. I'm going to go ahead and have Kiana Aldridge, who also recently returned home. Welcome home to you as well, Kiana, and the floor is yours.
Thank you. Well, hi, my name is Kiana. Thank you so much for letting me participate. I won my release from prison 9 months ago. I did almost 9 years for a felony that directly stemmed from me being sex trafficked as a teen. I struggle a lot now that I'm out of prison, but also inside prison. It was a very hard struggle being sex trafficked and, being seen as a criminal and then coming out to the world and being seen as a criminal still. The stuff that you don't realize what you were doing as a kid was wrong, but it really wasn't wrong. It was just a survival technique. So I feel like now I'm doing a little better. I still struggle, of course, because of the stuff that happened to me in prison, but I've been working on a law with my lawyer and other people. It's called AB 124, and it's in California. So hopefully we get that going, and hopefully everything works out with that. It's just been really hard, being seen as a criminal, like I said, and then you never receive support as a victim because I continue to be sexually abused in and out of prison. So it's really hard, but other than that, I never lost hope and I never gave up on myself. Struggling and continue to struggle, but I won't give up. I have people that support me and that believe in me, and I believe in myself. It's terrifying, but we can all overcome everything. Being young and being like inside the prison as a young woman and then coming out as a young woman still, it's a struggle, but I'm learning how to live life. I have a fiance now. I'm about to give birth. So I'm ready to enjoy the world and see what's best for me and my child, and just live that life that got taken for granted as a young teenager. So I'm ready to teach my kid on what will be okay in the real world. So, yeah.
Thank you, Kiana, and thank you to all of our panelists for opening up and sharing and being so brave with your story, and for being the voice for others that are right now incarcerated, who don't have anyone advocating for them. Also want to shout out the incredible attorneys who have represented some of the folks. Kiana, she alluded to Maggie Krill in California, her attorney, Patrice's attorney, Kate at Brooklyn Law School, and Alexis's attorney, Sasha, and David's attorney, Brian Stevenson. Attorneys play a really important role in helping to end some of these injustices. So just want to shout out the folks who've done an incredible job, along with Elizabeth Calvin, also an attorney who was Sarah's primary advocate in California. So I have some questions that I want to dive into for our panelists, and I'm going to start first with Patrice and Alexis. I think a lot of people don't realize that when we talk about children being prosecuted in the adult criminal justice system, what that means is all child status completely dissipates. So at the point of arrest to sentencing and incarceration, for all intents and purposes, you are no longer children. And so the question that I have for both Patrice and Alexis is, can you talk a little bit about what it was like for you both at the point of arrest, when you were first arrested and charged with the murder in the case? And did you understand what Miranda rights were? Did you have an attorney that was available to you? Did anybody notify your parents? What was that whole process like, being taken into custody for the first time and being alone in an interrogation room with law enforcement? And Patrice or Alexis, either one can start. Yeah.
I'll go first. It was very intense. I had two detectives screaming at me, yelling at me. They threatened me with the death penalty. I kept asking for my father. They never called him. He was never notified that I was there. They didn't offer me anything, I don't recall. I was there for 12 hours, like 13 hours. And they came and got me at like 9 in the morning. Yeah, and they didn't arrest me officially. So maybe longer. I didn't get arrested officially until like 10:30, 11 o'clock that night. Yeah, it was just very intense. They were screaming. I was scared. I was crying. I just kept asking for like somebody else. Like, could you call somebody else? Can you call my friend mom? Can you call my brother? Can you call my dad? And I felt like I wasn't getting out that room until I told them what they wanted to hear. And then I also feel like I was really scared of being that I had never been in this situation before, or even dealing with the criminal justice system before, never been interrogated before, just never went through any part of this process before. I believed what they said when they were like, oh, we're gonna kill you in front of your father. And all I could picture was my father. I could only picture, see, that'll make me cry thinking about it. But all I could picture was me really being tied to something, and then him watching me like have to die. And at 16, you would think that, oh, you should be smarter. You shouldn't have believed them. But I believed everything that they said. So yeah, it was a horrible experience.
My experience, I'm gonna say, was breathtaking. I knew a little bit of my rights because at that point I had dreams to go to the Air Force and be a criminologist. So I knew that I had a right for my mother to be there, and I knew I had a right for attorney. And I asked for my mom a couple times, and they laughed at me and told me she left because I was originally arrested with my parent. My mother's mom, she told me some of the best advice that she's ever gave me in my life, because she's never liked me because of my skin color. She told me not to say anything until my lawyer was present. And at 15, I tried to. I definitely tried to hold out and wait for a lawyer, but it got cold. I got sick. I was already scared. And they played the nice guy, the mean guy. And when you're already dealing with so much tactics from aggressive men, it really gets to you. And so as the interrogation went on, in the beginning, I was trying to protect myself, protect everybody. And then it just came down to the point where I just wanted to go to sleep and to protect my little sister. As long as she was going to be safe, I was willing to let them, whatever they wanted to know, whatever they wanted me to say. They didn't care what else I had to say. They were so convinced that it had something to do with drugs that they didn't hear the behind meaning. And I didn't even know what human trafficking was to explain the behind meaning, even though I did tell them that my trafficker, as they said it, my victim, that man that night, when I was explaining who he was to me and the connection, I told them that he was my pimp, and the prosecutors did not hear me. I'm still currently in a post-conviction, and at this very day, they can overturn my conviction. We're asking for it to go back to juvenile court, and we were just told no, still. Even though the prosecutors, not the prosecutor, my arresting officers sit on the human trafficking task force for Akron, Ohio right now. They sit on that division. One is the chief of inspector or something for the Summit County Bureau of Human Trafficking. And he told a reporter of mine that he doesn't regret me being free, but yet the prosecutors that stand on the other side of him, they're not budging. They don't care. It's like you've seen my life be exposed and you have all the evidence, and they still hide behind this face. And they know, even in my Supreme Court and at my clemency hearing, I had a judge deliberately ask this prosecutor, not once, I've had 2 people ask this prosecutor, why haven't you prosecuted the other person in this case? I have 2 victims, and one of my victims is alive. He was having sex with me that night. I was 15, he was 21. But they still do not take any of those actions. So that night was devastating for me. That night let me know that I didn't really have family, that I was by myself. But then I also slowly brewed a fire underneath me and gave me fight because I was tired of taking what everybody else was going to give me.
Thank you both for that, your responses, and it highlights again why it's not enough just to address one issue of the criminal justice system. We need comprehensive reform so that children have access to attorneys immediately upon arrest, and that they're not alone with law enforcement without an attorney present, so that they understand their rights, but also to make sure that the process is protected and you all are protected. So thank you for sharing that. My next question is for David and Kiana. In spite of everything that has happened to you both, you're able to survive prison and come home. How did you manage to overcome the trauma of your victimization and the trauma of your incarceration to come out such strong, powerful, and amazing and beautiful people?
Honestly, in prison, I went through a lot of suicide attempts. So it was really hard, coming out and thinking, am I gonna survive? Because of all the suicide attempts that I have been through in prison. And just recently, a couple weeks before I got out of prison, there was a suicide attempt. So it was just the overrealization of being real, of being able to get out of prison and actually live a life and be someone who I want to be. So it's I overcame a lot through people that have supported me, my lawyer, my family. I think that helped a lot. In the end, they were all there. So I think that really settled in, and I just realized I could do it. That I don't need to give up on myself or just give up on other people, because it's not just me giving up on myself. I'll be giving up on people that actually care about me. But it being really hard in prison. I mean, it was horrible, to be honest. It was really horrible. But the obstacles I overcame was through family and friends and in myself, learning how to trust in myself and trust in other people. And know that I could do it in the real world.
With me, I'd say it is two things. One was definitely faith, and it was definitely very interesting how that happened, because it was the detective, after I confessed, when he was taking me back to the county jail, and asked me if I believed in God, and it was such a ironic but powerful moment, and really just growing in that faith, and that trust, and actually looking at God as someone who loved me, because going through the abuse, I was still going to church and forced to go to church and this and that, and it's like, how could a loving God allow this stuff to happen, But then while I was in prison, I began to see that it wasn't God that allowed it, but it was the sin that was in the world, and how God was going to take what happened to me to help other people. And I mean, I see that now in the way I'm able to share my story in universities and other places, and people come up afterwards and they talk about how they were abused as a child. And just because I was able to share, they feel empowered, and that's so powerful, knowing that the comfort I received, I'm now able to give to other people. And the second is forgiveness. So I was in this behavior modification program at St. Clair Correctional Facility, and in it, you had to read self-help books. So I was reading this self-help book about child abuse, child sexual abuse, and it came to the point where I was reading it, and it was talking about how the person that's sexually abused blames themselves, where they think that they're the reason that this abuse happened, that they did something that caused this person to be attracted to them, and it was this aha moment where it's like, okay, David, you are not the reason this happened. You do not have to blame yourself for this anymore. So that ability to forgive myself began the healing process, and that was so powerful and such a moment that changed my whole trajectory. And then thinking about Brian Stevenson, and the one of his most famous quotes is, "You're not as bad as the worst thing you've ever done," and what I did in 1999, that does not define me. It's what I'm doing today. It's what I'm doing tomorrow. The abuse that happened to me does not define me. I am the person that gets to give that the power in my life. Is it something that's going to control me, or do I now use it to help other people gain that same healing and support and strength from it? And so that's what I do.
Thank you so much, Key and David. And I know we're bumping up against time. I swear we could talk. You guys have such wisdom and incredible grace. I'd love to be able to just have this conversation for a while longer. I know we've got to jump soon. I want to first give Sara an opportunity to close this out and provide us with just answer, Sara, for us. What can we do to support child sex abuse victims in the justice system? What resources need to be made available to folks who are in situations like yours and other kids, so that they don't become system involved? And can you talk a little bit about what some of your thoughts are on that?
Thank you. Make it as quick as possible. I really believe that if we individualize the needs and tailor the resources to fit the individual's needs or even unaddressed needs, and create something to push the envelope a little bit, right? We need to start within our communities. We need to have this beautiful collaborative effort applied in all institutions. I believe that anyone who has identified as being abused, sexually assaulted in any way, shape, or form, that again, they are surrounded by a support system that again is tailored to meet the individual's needs, and that there's training provided for these individuals who hold these spaces, so that there's not a transference of their belief of what our needs are. I think there's a beautiful space to grow and explore more. Again, we can really create healing change that's transferable amongst the people that are still in the system in their transition coming home, and maybe move away from dare I say, the political influence, but move more towards a human compassion piece, which is aligned with Christ-like values, meaning love, compassion, peace, non-judgments. I really believe that if we can build from that space, that we'll be able to truly be comfortable being vulnerable and realigning ourselves and neutralizing the traumas that have been impacted. So that's what I will say in that space for now. So thank you all. Appreciate you. Love you.
Thank you, Sarah. You guys have all done amazingly. For those that are interested, there are 3 bills in Congress right now that are pending. One by Bruce Westerman, Congressman Bruce Westerman, who has introduced Sarah's Law, and Thomas Mills, his legislative aide is actually on. Thomas, I want to highlight you real quick and give you a moment just to talk briefly about that and the incredible work your office has been doing to shine a light on this issue and make sure that what has happened to the panelists here don't happen to others. So I just want to give you a moment to jump in as well.
No, for sure. Thanks, James. And obviously, thank y'all for letting me join and listen to all of your stories. And obviously, thank you for all the work that you're doing and continuing to tell the stories that and what y'all have been through. As we all know, and obviously know from today, every child deserves hope. And thank you for bringing to light these issues we're talking about. I know that there's a lot of times that Capitol Hill is seemingly partisan, but these issues affect children and young adults who are victims, and we need to do a better job of protecting and shielding them. So, really appreciate what y'all have been doing. I know we've already talked about what Congressman Westerman has done with introducing Sarah's Law, which after talking to Sarah a couple years ago, it really touched him, and he really wanted to make sure that we were passing laws that are helpful to victims. And it is definitely unacceptable that current law requires children to be forced to use violence to protect themselves against their abuser and receive a harsh sentence that furthers their trauma. And so discretion is needed when dealing with children to address the cause of the crime and the likelihood of rehabilitation. And so, that's something that we're really looking into, but definitely appreciate everything that y'all have done today. And thank you for letting us be a part of it.
Thank you, Thomas. And for folks that are interested in taking action on Congressman Westerman's bill, along with Congressman Tony Cardenas and Congresswoman Karen Bass, whose legislation collectively will transform the way that kids who have experienced severe trauma like this are treated in the justice system, please go to our website, humanrightsforkids.org. Under the Take Action, you'll find the bill numbers along with a way for you to get involved. If you're a member of the press or a staffer who wasn't able to ask a question, please feel free to reach out. We'll make sure that opportunity is afforded so that you can follow up with the panelists individually. Again, thank you to Alexis and Kiana and David and Sarah and Yasmin and Patrice for your incredible knowledge, wisdom, and grace in joining this. And I hope folks will also join our next panel, which is getting ready to start right now, and we're running late too. So I hope that you all will, because you're going to hear from some other really phenomenal speakers who've gone through similar experiences in the adult criminal justice system. So please join us. Congresswoman Karen Bass will also be in that listening session as well. So we're looking forward to seeing many of the same faces in that one. Thank you all again. Have a great day, and we will be in touch. Take care.